everybody, it is Dan Levine.
And I'm Bryan Perri.
And many of you might know us from our theater ACT of Connecticut, which is one of many incredible arts and cultural organizations right here in beautiful Ridgefield, Connecticut.
We love living here in Ridgefield. We're always amazed at how this community cherishes arts and theater, values inclusivity, and promotes our cultural history.
Actually, Ridgefield is rich in history. In fact, you could walk by a certain home or property and perhaps not even know the history behind it.
Well, today we want to show you one of Ridgefield's most important properties, the Keeler Tavern.
So right now I'm sitting in the walled arbor and rose garden here at the beautiful Keeler Tavern. The Keeler Tavern Museum and the History Center have set up a really cool self-guided tour of the property where you can learn all about the very important features of the home, of the property. It's really pretty incredible. Of course, right now it is not open to the public, but will reopen again as soon as this period of quarantine and self-isolation is over. Something that's really exciting is that thanks to a generous grant from the Ridgefield thrift shop, this self-guided tour is actually going to be upgraded next year. This generous grant will pay for the costs of designing and installing a series of 11 permanent museum signs throughout the property, as well as the creation of an audio component that will take visitors on a fantastic tour.
As Dan said, this self-guided tour is currently closed to the public, but we've gotten special permission from the Keeler Tavern to take you, the viewer, on a special virtual tour.
Now, this self-guided tour explores the contributions that the famous architect Cass Gilbert and his family made to this incredible property. But to truly appreciate those contributions, I think we have to step back in history a little bit further, step back in time to learn more about the original owners of this fantastic property. So let's do that right now. It all started with a young man named Benjamin Hoyt. In 1704, Benjamin was left an orphan at the end of the French and Indian Massacre in Deerfield, Massachusetts. He made his way to Norwalk, Connecticut, and lived with relatives. In 1713, when he was in his early 20s, he moved to Ridgefield and began building the foundations of what we now refer to as the Keeler Tavern, back then referred to as Lot 2. The building was originally a one-room dwelling with a stone fireplace. At the time of Benjamin's death in 1759, Lot 2 was inherited by his son David, who later opted to sell it to his nephew, Timothy Keeler. Timothy was an entrepreneur and decided to open the private home to travelers and to residents desiring a drink, thereby establishing Keeler's Inn in 1772, along with his wife Esther. By the end of his life, Timothy was an importer, a ship owner, a political activist, and was Ridgefield's postmaster. He was considered the town's best informed resident and further established the Keeler Tavern as the most crucial and important businesses in town for decades to come. Timothy Keeler died in 1815, and ownership of the Keeler Tavern passed on to his son, William. William's sister, Anna, left her job teaching in an elementary school to help her brother operate the business. They renamed the property Keeler's Hotel. William died unexpectedly in 1827, and Anna became the sole owner and keeper of the hotel. After receiving her inheritance, she married her longtime suitor, Abijah Rezegi. After getting married, Abijah served as the landlord while Anna acted as the manager of the hotel. Anna died in 1862 and Abijah in 1888, and the hotel became property of their daughter Anna Marie. Anna Marie, along with Phyllis Du Bois, took over the operations of the hotel. Phyllis was a freed slave and an integral part of the family. After faithfully managing her family's home and business, Anna Marie decided to cede ownership to someone interested in treasuring and restoring the property. That someone was Cass Gilbert, a wealthy, talented, and successful architect in New York who was looking for a summer property in the country. And in 1907, the property became the Gilberts. So here we are at stop number 1 of the self-guided tour, the Cannonball House. Now this is probably one of the most famous stops along the tour, and I'll show you why in a second. Now Cass Gilbert had always been attracted to this property because of its association with the Revolutionary War. Let me show you something really cool. So as you can see, lodged in this wall, the original wall here, is a cannonball. The Keeler Tavern in the late 1700s had become a popular stop between New York, people traveling from New York to Boston and vice versa. And this property became a sort of a central hub of revolutionary affairs and activities. And the British didn't like that. So this property was fired upon by the British. And as you can see, with this cannonball lodged in the wall.
So here we are at stop number 2. When Cass Gilbert purchased this property in 1907, he wanted to modernize and upgrade it, but still maintain the original structure. Cass Gilbert, of course, was a famous architect who not only designed the Woolworth Building in Manhattan, but the Supreme Court Building in Washington, D.C. So it makes total sense he'd want to put his own stamp on the property.
Now, one of the changes that Cass Gilbert made to the property after purchasing it was the addition of an extension to the rear of the building, which was a new dining room with French doors that opened up onto a patio. And it was right here, this very patio. Look, the stairs are even the same. See the stairs? Right there. But it was on this very patio that the family actually took a Thanksgiving picture of themselves in 1923. Let's go look. So here we are at stop number 3 on the tour. It's called the Gilbert Wing. As Brian mentioned earlier, when the family moved into the home, Cass Gilbert wanted to update it and modernize it to suit the needs of the family. So in addition to the extension that he built in the rear of the building, he added a large dining room, a totally modern kitchen, servants' quarters upstairs, and all of the modern amenities of the day, such as heat, electricity, and even a telephone.
So here we are at stop number 4. When the Gilberts first purchased this property, the cottage you see behind me was actually located to the rear of the main house. The Gilberts moved the cottage here to make room for the extension Dan mentioned in stop number 3. In later years, they added an L to the cottage to make room for the Gilberts' chauffeur.
Now, further down this driveway is a barn that Cass built in 1910. He built this to match the main house. He built this to house his horses and his carriages, and actually upstairs in little apartments is where the coachmen lived. Soon after he built this, he replaced the horses and the carriages with an automobile. You see, he owned a yellow Pierce Arrow automobile, which was one of the most famous cars of the time, owned by presidents and Hollywood stars and royalty. Now here we are at stop number 5 of the tour, the croquet lawn. Croquet was a pastime that the Gilberts loved to play. It was reserved for the well-to-do because it required a flat lawn, and that meant that gardeners and landscapers had to maintain the thing. So it was something that the Gilberts loved, and every Sunday after dinner they would come right out to this lawn and play croquet.
Here we are at stop number 6, which is my favorite stop, the walled garden. Cass's wife Julia loved to garden, so in 1915 he built her this beautiful walled garden. It features a central reflecting pool, rose-covered arbors, and these beautiful custom-made urns that were made in Italy. Come take a look.
Julia Gilbert's passion for gardening led her to become one of the founding members of the Ridgefield Garden Club in 1914, and her daughters were also members. The garden club would meet many times over at the Cannonball House and also at their townhouse in Manhattan. The Ridgefield Garden Club is still a very popular club and very active here in Ridgefield, Connecticut today.
Here we are at stop number 8, the Garden House. Even with the addition to the main house, the Gilberts still needed more room to entertain their guests. The Garden House was built to entertain parties of up to 100 or more. Guests would include celebrities from New York, artists, businessmen, politicians, but not all the guests were famous. Julia held teas for the graduating seniors of Ridgefield High School and also famously held send-off parties for soldiers and their families before they headed off to the front in World War I.
Julia Gilbert's love of gardens was not just reflected in the walled garden. There were gardens all over this property, both formal and informal. In fact, there was a garden right here where this driveway is located right now, which actually predates the walled garden and also the garden house.
Here we are at stop number 10, the Memorial Library. In 1934, Cass died on a business trip to England. His wife Julia commissioned their son, Cass Jr., who was also an architect, to build a library in order to house his father's papers. The building was built too small to be a library and now serves as the museum's visitor center.
Here we are at the fountain on Main Street. This fountain is probably one of Ridgefield, Connecticut's most recognizable landmarks, but a lot of people might not know that this dates back to Cass Gilbert and his family. Stop number 11 on the tour, the Cass Gilbert Fountain. In 1913, Ridgefield town officials voted to install a watering trough for horses at the intersection of Main Street and West Lane. Cass Gilbert, not wanting the horses and all of the associated messes gathering in front of his home, objected to that plan and instead offered to design and donate to the town a fountain for that location on the condition that no trough would be installed within 1,000 feet radius of his home. The town officials accepted, and in 1916, a fountain made of Vermont marble was installed. That summer, several letters of appreciation from notable residents were published in the editorials of the Ridgefield Press, but no official thanks or ceremony came from the town. Why? It's believed that some of the town's full-time residents and voters were unhappy with the town's decision, still needing to water their horses somewhere, and officials found that the safest political response was to just ignore the gift, potentially alienating a single summer person rather than a large group of Ridgefield voters. But in June 2016, a century after it was installed, the town of Ridgefield held the ceremony to formally acknowledge and thank Cass Gilbert for his gift, which has become one of Ridgefield's most acclaimed landmarks. Well, that's it. That is our virtual tour of the Keeler Tavern property.
It's really a beautiful property. I hope you all visit it once it reopens.
And as I mentioned, later on this year, the tour is going to get a bit of an upgrade. There's going to be an app available that will lead people all over this amazing property with a lot of detail. Until then, stay safe, everybody.